Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome Professor Ed Soule, Associate Professor in our McDonough School of Business, to our Georgetown Now conversation series. And Ed, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to join us and to share your scholarship and your teaching with our community this morning. So let's get started. Your research brings together issues of morality in business, ethics, and leadership, and you have a background in business and in moral philosophy. What are some of the insights that have grounded your work, the perspective that you bring as a member of our business school faculty?
Well, thanks for inviting me to have this conversation, Jack. I think that my perspective is a little unusual. You know, as you say, my career has been evenly divided, roughly 20 or so years in business, 20 or so years in with Georgetown, because I've never worked at another school. But I think I am pretty adept at moving between those worlds and understanding both the worlds. I would say that uh, most people in the corporate world have a hazy and somewhat um, uh, wrong understanding of what happens in academia, and likewise, there's a lot of confusion on both sides of that. Um, but I think understanding the realities of business is a benefit to my students, and oftentimes comes at the consternation of my colleagues. Um, the benefit to the students is that and parenthetically, in the undergraduate program, I have never taught anyone but seniors. And the last 10 or 15 years, just seniors in the fall semester. Before, as I say to them, they go feral in in the spring term. But I know what they're walking into, and I have a sense of urgency to just equip them as well as I possibly can before they leave this hilltop. And so it's I would say that informs my perspective to a great degree as a teacher. On the research side, I would say that I have a very low tolerance for highly abstract material. Don't get me wrong. I think business, many aspects of business are under theorized, and I think that's something we can bring to them. But I find that whether I'm looking at a journal article or I'm in a colloquium, I'm always asking myself, what are the stakes here? If this argument goes through, what what difference does it make? And that's not fair to the authors or to my colleagues, because oftentimes at the moment we don't understand or we don't know what the impact is, but we discover it later on. But nonetheless, I guess I have the curiosity of an academic, in particular a philosopher, but I would say that I'm a little more interested in the difference that my work makes. And when we talk about perspective, um, this really doesn't have anything to do with my students or with scholarship, but I do think I have a different perspective on the work, on the job. And I would say that I am still amazed that places like Georgetown exist in this day and age, that, to be devoted to the values and the aspirations of Georgetown University is a pretty unusual and very special situation after you've had a real job. But I don't mean that we don't have real jobs, but you know what I mean.
Sure.
The unrelenting accountability in business can, it's intense. And we're in an environment where, um, don't get me wrong, it's not easy to make tenure and to, stay on top of your game, but it's a different kind of accountability. And I would put it this way: we can almost on our own decide what we're going to be accountable to. In my world, the world I've created, it's students. I am, I just, when I prepare for a class, I am, um, I am thinking of individuals that are going to be listening to me, and I really bear down on that. And I'm kind of obsessive about it, but I don't have to do that.
Right.
There are other ways, other levels of intensity you can use in teaching, and so to afford somebody the latitude to sort of set their standards and to, I mean, really, the idea of tenured employment is an outlier today, and then to be tenured to do what we get to do, it's I'll never. Uh, I'll never forget that. I mean, that's top of mind to me. So even when I'm like, dealing with, a problem or, a difficult situation, sometimes I just have to remind myself, it doesn't get any better than this.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I know in recent years, you've had a tremendous impact in researching and documenting the work of living wage factories and their impacts on communities. You've been a part of the Altagracia project, a living wage factory in the Dominican Republic that our community is engaged with. You were on the research team studying the On Purpose label in Rwanda, which is an initiative of the Kate Spade and Company. What have we learned from these projects? Why are they so important?
Jack, I would say they're important because they illustrate what's possible. I mean, we're talking about global value chains in the fashion industry, where a lot of bad things have been documented. In fact, there's been a lot more work on what goes wrong than projects like this. But so these are sort of dog bites man kind of projects, novel business models that, if you go by the textbooks, they are destined to fail, but they don't. And I'm always curious, why? Why is that? How come this thing survived against all the odds? And I think they've garnered attention, and quite honestly, a fair amount of it. I've often thought that one of the most important things I've ever published was a piece on managerial moral responsibilities in an academic journal. And it has been cited, I'd say, something in the low to mid two figures. It's like, and I'm based on some of the citations, I'm not sure that it was actually read, but you throw a little PDF into the world documenting these projects, and you hear from people all over the place still. And I think that speaks to the really keen interest in changing, making changes in global supply chains. And things in business doesn't usually change because there's a rational argument in favor of it, or because there are any strong values at stake. It usually takes somebody else doing it, and then somebody else sees it and they pick up this piece or that piece and they incorporate it. And major fashion brands have responded. I mean, we've worked with a couple of them on the ideas in those reports. So I think that's why there's so much curiosity. And then, I mean, the things that I've learned from it would be the people that initiated them, and what it takes to be successful. Because there's a lot of really good-hearted people that want to do something like this, but maybe they don't have the industry background or the business acumen. And even those that do may not have the leadership skills. And so you have to combine that side of the of the skills inventory with an impulse to want to help people. And sometimes I've put that as like a humanitarian impulse But I don't mean that in the sense of, oh, I'm going to race in here and I'm going to, do this, that, and the other and make life better. It's more like I can. It's like seeing that if I just include this group of people in our supply chain as a vendor, um, great things can happen. And I think that this has been for me anyway, and I think I speak for my co-authors, the best use of our academic perch. What I mean by that is the reason we are lucky enough to do this kind of work is, don't take this, this may sound kind of crass, but it's the Georgetown brand. It's this idea that, well, if I'm Kate Spade and Company, Georgetown University would be kind of a go-to place to bring in some scholars to do, to document what they're doing and put it out into the world in such a way that there's no ideology behind it. We don't take money from these organizations. To which I'd say thank you. We've been supported by the university and through other generous funders. But how many organizations in the world have the skills? And I'm not talking about myself. I'm talking about me, John Klein, Pietro Ridley, Kathy Tinsley. We can bring these skills to bear on these projects for years. 4 trips to Rwanda, multiple trips to the DR. We can do this, and we don't have to make anybody happy. We don't have to have a slant. We're not selling anything except objective documentation of what really happened. And I think scholars are good at that. We know how to, we tell the truth as we come to it through evidence, and that's our job. And then we turn that on a project like this, and I think I just can't think of a better use of the position that we find ourselves in. It was a real pleasure to do that kind of work, and it's not over. We're looking at another round of research down in Rwanda. In fact, we were planning to go there when the world turned upside down.
Oh, well, thank you. Now, I know another area you focused on is with government regulation and corporate leadership ethics. And as we think about these past 2 decades, from the Enron scandal to the Great Recession to the present day, what are some of the lessons and issues that you find most critical to focus on when we think about corporate leadership and ethics?
Well, first of all, I would say that on the regulatory side, the history of at least the regulation that in the areas where I work in capital markets in particular, the regulation will never anticipate the next problem. It's just the nature of the beast. So the waves and waves of regulation throughout the 20th century and to the present have not done a whole lot to staunch scandals of the magnitude of what we saw recently with one of the major banks in the United States. It's storied franchise. One of the most highly regarded companies has been under severe sanctions by the Federal Reserve and other regulators. Why is that? Because in the final analysis, it comes down to the leadership of the organization and the culture that they foster within the ranks. With large organizations, any company of the scope of our major financial institutions, the person at the helm, they can't they can't stamp out misconduct. They're like, what are they going to do? All they can do is, to the extent possible, is press down through the ranks a culture of playing by the rules, acting with integrity, and treating each other with respect. If that happens, the regulations are really secondary, and in fact, they can get in the way in some cases. But if that culture is right, then the place works. An area that you mentioned leadership, and I guess an area that I've been spending a lot of time thinking about and working with a couple of companies on is that the most effective form of leadership nowadays is not the kind that issues from authority, but the peer or lateral leadership that goes on throughout the various groups and teams and trading desks and the departments. And I think anymore the responsibility of senior leadership is really to catalyze and to stimulate the peer leadership. So just because when you think about getting the work done, I like to use the analogy of an athletic team, and Major League Baseball being a passion of mine. I really do believe that the influence of the manager pales in comparison to the influence of a veteran player when it comes to the performance of all the other players. So if you can get that veteran, to carry the message, it's going to be heard in a way that senior leadership just can't. So how you catalyze that lower level all the way down peer leadership, I think is really the challenge these days.
I know that in the classes that you're teaching, including this semester, they often share a unifying theme, which is ethical leadership. And this is a moment in which the role of local, national, and global leaders is especially important as we face the challenges of the pandemic. And I think our public is looking for strong, ethical, moral leadership as we try to move through this crisis together. Can you talk about your classes, the ideas that you explore, and how you see this current moment sharing your teaching, shaping your teaching?
Yeah, so I guess the difference today, if you say, well, what is obviously leaders have been, I'm not telling you anything, have been dealt a very complex series of challenges, any one of which would be a burden. But if you're to look at them collectively, and what is different about leadership today, I think part of it is that you're leading people that are isolated. You're leading people that are not connected in the same way that they normally are, and keeping the organization tied together through a period like this is a challenge, because when I think about the ultimate challenge of leadership, it's to get everybody coordinated and cooperating and collaborating, and it's just really hard to do right now. So the means of doing that have changed, and leaders themselves are also subject to this problem of being very isolated, very removed from the just the normal interchange of walking down the hall and seeing people and all, everything that we associate with work. There, and stress levels are higher. There's this almost background condition today of what for some people is an immobilizing level of stress. For others, it's just sort of this pounding, or this emptiness. And under those circumstances, how does a leader do what is so critical in a situation like this, which is to have the wherewithal, as some of my special forces students say in my graduate courses, to create a white space where you can look up and out. In other words, to just slow it down and to be able to look on, look all the way out on the horizon. That is really hard to do when you are dealing with fires, intense fires every single day in a state of isolation under stress. So what I guess what the only the lessons that I share are the ones I glean from the field, from what I'm seeing other organizations do. And those would be things like continuing to emphasize that this is a short-term problem and we don't want to break something. In other words, we don't want to make a long-term move in order to respond to what will be a passing crisis. That's hard to do. It's easier said than done, right? But other organizations I've seen where they just take a time to stop everything, particularly the parts of their organization where they have people subject to um, really intense conflicts of interest, where the possibilities of misconduct are really, really high. Those folks are brought in like this on Zoom in groups where they just stop them for a day. And what are they going to do? They're going to do some things to remind folks of the values and double down on those values in some way, shape, or form. And it's going to be different in different organizations. But I I um, I think the lessons that we're seeing in the field that are promising. I mean, I guess that's what I try to bring to the table. It's not a time for platitudes and little quips about getting through this. It's intense. I guess the other things we've learned is that balance sheets really matter, and organizations that there's no way you could have like operationally prepared for this. It resilience in supply chains is something that has been talked about a lot. And okay, there you got that. Otherwise, I think the organizations that will flourish and come out of this with as stronger a franchise have something to fall back on, and that's a lesson we keep learning. Some businesses have gotten messages better than others, and yeah, and I guess we're also getting another lesson these days about the difference between risk and uncertainty. And it's like, I don't know how many times we have to learn this one, but if you take it seriously, then we won't assume that we haven't seen the other shoe fall, right? That we'll stop our tendency, our basic human need for coherent narratives about what's going to happen, and accept the fact that there is an element of uncertainty that, sorry,
Yeah.
can't control.
No, thank you. Look, maybe we could take this just a little bit deeper in terms of how you're imagining coming out of this moment, rebuilding our economy, supporting our workforce. How do you see us emerging from the impact of COVID in terms of really providing the framework for our colleagues, for our workers across the globe?
Yeah, I guess I'm not really good at on the macroeconomic stuff. I'm still amazed that we're going through a pandemic and we haven't had a financial crisis. Now maybe that's the other shoe that's going to fall. But it just I don't understand a lot of the big forces at play right now. I'm very suspicious of simple explanations. I think the the culture of an organization. I sorry to keep drilling down on this concept of culture, but maintaining it under these conditions within an organization is just. Um, I would say that if that is the focus, if if leaders of organizations were to back up and do a little bit of work on exactly what that ideal or that aspirational culture looks like, and then figure out right now how to um, how to reinforce it, how to make it even stronger than it was coming in, um, that will get people through. I think the other sorts of efforts, I mean, there's some low-hanging fruit that a lot of organizations have done, which is to address the immediate needs of people, especially the mental health needs. Um, and I guess it will also depend on what organizations don't do. So the ones that have pulled the easy levers and done layoffs and downsizings and rational, that stuff is going, in the best of times, that will damage an organization. And done under these circumstances, it's going to be doubly difficult to recover from it. People will remember how how they were treated when when our backs were up against the wall, and all the research indicates that the reputation of an organization depends on how it treats its people. That's not to say that there aren't real needs to conserve resources, and that falls on people. But Jack, it's beyond me to predict, how this is. I mean, for one thing, it's hitting the bottom of the pyramid the hardest all over the world. Obviously, in the U.S., that's true. I mean, it's hitting the people that really can't afford it. Um, it's so strange what's going on right now, because you've got um, people that were wealthy coming into the pandemic are wealthier. Philanthropy is doing quite well right now. And then there are people that were hurting coming into it, and they're hurting more. So I mean, closing that gap that's that's an auditorium full of socially distanced minds beyond mine to try to get on top of that.
Well, I can't thank you enough, Ed, for sharing this moment with us and for all that you do for our university. I can't begin to express my appreciation. As we close, is there a message that you'd like to share with the members of our community as we begin this spring semester?
The sort of, I guess it's the same sort of thought that I would have at any point, and that is to just do the best we can and be kind to ourselves.
Thank you. Thank you. And Ed, thanks again for being here today, sharing your reflections with us. I'm very grateful we had this opportunity to talk, and I appreciate all that you share with our community. And I look forward to being with all of you again soon. Take care of yourselves and take care of everyone around you. For every Hoya, everywhere.